Okay, today we're going to be talking about mistakes that most beginners make and how you can kind of avoid them in the Pokemon TCG. Hi, my name's Wesley, and I've been playing the Pokemon trading card game for about 3 years now. And while I'm not a pro Pokemon player, I have done decently well. At least I'm definitely not a beginner and can hold my ground in a lot of situations. So, but I've also I've had my fair share of mistakes playing the game. So I'm going to give you guys some mistakes that I definitely made, as well as I see people make when playing the game at the beginning, and kind of how to avoid them. So, firstly, I'm going to talk about the board state. And a lot of beginners don't look at the board state when playing the game. They don't realize what their opponent's doing, as well as don't realize that if I just pass the turn right now, my opponent will kill the Pokemon that is in the active spot. They can do that, and they haven't changed what they've done. So please, when you're looking, it's a very common mistake, is just not realizing what your opponent has on the board, especially like threat evaluation. Not realizing what Pokemons they have that are threats, and maybe also not realizing that they can just win on the spot. So a big mistake that I see a lot of beginners make is not looking at the board state and not realizing what threats their opponent have. The next mistake that a lot of beginners make is benching too many Pokemon. Now, while it might seem that benching a lot of Pokemon is good for you because it gives you more options, but a lot of the times it makes you end up benching liabilities, which are good for your opponent to have and sometimes not beneficial for you. And if you end up benching all 5 Pokemon on the bench, you can bench lock yourself out of other options that you might need later, especially if you're playing sort of a toolbox deck that has a lot of different Pokemon in it that are very situational, or even just any deck that has Pokemon that are used in only specific situations, and you just bench them because you're like, this card beats this deck, must beat this one too. And that's not always the case. So consider, this is also in a little bit of like your board state knowledge, but consider the Pokemon a little bit more before benching it. And sometimes you also don't need more than one Pokemon of each kind. For example, if you're playing Charizard, Pidgeot, you sometimes don't need more than one Charizard or 2 Charizards. So don't bench all 4 Charmanders if you play 4 of them. Sometimes it's best to realize that you only need 1 or 2. Yeah. Another mistake that a lot of Pokemon players make is just trying to do as much damage as they possibly can. This is especially important in decks like Goldango and Raging Bolt, where you are spending resources to do more damage, or even just like attaching a tool that does more damage. Like sometimes you don't need to attach a max belt to something, even though it already KOs it. You should save that max belt for when you don't KO something and you need it later, which is a little bit of resource management. A lot of it is resource management, but don't just try to do as much damage as you can in hopes that you'll one-shot it despite already knowing that you one-shot it. This is also big in decks that have, it's mainly especially in decks that have damage modifiers, like Festival Lead or even like Future Box, where it has Pokemon that will increase the damage that you have. Don't just try to max it out, just try to hit the exact number that you need. Don't try to shoot way up into the stars, it's not always worth it. It's a mistake that beginners make. I still sometimes make it, but usually I try to calculate how much damage that I'm doing, and then try to exactly KO the active Pokemon, instead of just trying to shoot for the stars. Yep. Another mistake, I didn't count I guess this is, wait, 1, 2, 3. Mistake number 4, I guess, is a lot of beginners don't actually know what cards are in their deck. And what do I mean by that is, like, actually knowing the exact 60 that you are playing in that situation. Sometimes you don't need to know the 60, you just need to know roughly the counts of cards, or what cards your deck generally includes. But knowing the exact 60 can definitely help you not make plays and then look like a fool because you don't actually play one of the cards in your deck. For example, Arvening for a counter catcher, but you don't play counter catcher, or you've already used all of the counter catchers in your deck. So you should know how many cards are in your deck, of especially the counts of cards, or more so the counts of key cards. Knowing how many that are in your deck, counting what's in your hand and what's in your discard, so you know what's actually in the deck, so that, as well as prize checking. Price checking, although it's not super important when you're just starting out, it is good to know what options you have in your deck. So this starts with knowing what 60 cards you play, knowing your default options that you have to play in your deck. This is super important if you're playing, like, for your energy counts, knowing how many energy you play in your deck and how many you have left in the deck, because if you use all of your energy to, like, retreat a Pokemon, or are just discarding it because you're like, I got like 6 more of these in the deck, but in reality you only have 1 in the deck and you need 2 to attack, you're hooped and you're actually out of the game. So knowing that is, like, super important. And then mistake number 5 that a lot of beginners make is magically thinking that your opponent's not going to KO your active Pokemon. You have to put them into a situation where they're not going to KO their active Pokemon, or realize that they're going to KO your active Pokemon and don't put a Pokemon that you really need into the active spot. It's pretty self-explanatory. I see this a lot, especially in pre-releases. Although the pre-release format, it's not as competitive, but if you wanted to win a pre-release, you should take this into consideration. This was super prevalent in when I played the Journey Together pre-release, and my deck consisted of 2 Hops Cramorant and nothing else. And people, which, if you don't know, one-shot everything into the active that didn't have 128, or didn't have more than 120 HP. So most of the format, or they just couldn't handle the heat. And a lot of people would attach an energy to their active, being like, oh, next turn I'll attack because it takes 2 energy, not realizing that that thing's getting blown to the moon and not existing anymore. So you need to realize that maybe I should attach to one of my benched Pokemon because the guy in the active is about to get sent to outer space and cannot attack next turn, despite thinking that my opponent might magically let it stick around. You have to see that and realize that, because your opponent's not going to be super nice a lot of the time. They're trying to also win. So yeah, those are, I guess, the 5 mistakes that I see a lot of beginners make that are pretty easy to avoid. A lot of it is just knowing the board state and realizing that what's on the board is on the board, and it's not going to magically change. And usually it changes for the worse for you, not necessarily the better. So look at those things, realize them, know what cards are in your deck so that you know what you can do, what your deck can do. Yeah. I hope you guys see that and are able to improve off of this, maybe even just a little bit. Yeah, that's all for today. I know I said in the last video I'd do this video next week, but I also had, like, the next day off so I could make it today. So we're gonna try to make, we made it, so it's here. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to see the other video that I made, it's, like, right here. or something. I don't know how the YouTube end cards work actually, but I'll try to put it right here. Yeah, hasta la vista.